I'll never forget the day my husband walked in and handed me a letter. It was as if time froze, and everything else melted away except for the words on that page. He stood there, expressionless, expecting me to take it in stride. I remember feeling numb, as if someone had punched me in the gut, and I couldn't catch my breath. The words on that letter still echo in my mind. I've decided to sell our home and move in with my girlfriend. The betrayal cut deep, like a sharp knife slicing through my very being. I felt like I'd been punched in the face, left reeling and trying to make sense of what was happening. At first, I thought it was just a cruel joke. I thought maybe he was testing me, pushing my buttons to see how I'd react. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something that chilled me to the bone, a complete lack of remorse. It was as if he'd made this decision without even considering how it would affect me. My mind went blank. I couldn't form words, couldn't think straight. All I could do was stare at him, wondering if this was some kind of twisted joke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was real. This was my life being ripped apart, thread by thread. The initial shock was followed by anger, frustration, and a deep sadness. I felt like I'd been living in a dream world, and suddenly, I'd woken up to a nightmare. I started thinking about all the memories we'd made in that house, all the laughter and tears, and how it was all being taken away from me. As the reality of the situation set in, I began to feel a sense of determination. I knew I couldn't just sit around and wait for him to make his next move. I needed to take control, to stand up for myself and fight for what I deserved. But I also knew I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I needed to be smart, calculated, and strategic. That's when it hit me, the realization that I'd been living in a state of complacency for far too long. I'd let my husband walk all over me, treating me like a doormat. I'd put his needs before mine, sacrificing my own happiness and well-being. But not anymore. I took a deep breath, and something inside me shifted. I felt a spark of empowerment, a sense of confidence that I'd never felt before. I knew exactly what I had to do. I'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for the perfect opportunity to take back control of my life. I walked over to my husband, and with a calm, steady voice, I said, "Let's talk about this letter you've written." I could see the surprise in his eyes, the hint of concern that he wasn't expecting me to react this way. But I didn't let that stop me. "I've been thinking," I said, "and I've come to a realization. I'm not going to let you sell our home without a fight. I'm not going to let you take everything away from me without a fight. You see, I've been doing some research, and I've discovered something interesting." I pulled out a folder from my desk, filled with documents and papers. My husband's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. He thought he had the upper hand, but I'd been playing a different game all along. "I've been preparing for this moment," I said, "and I've come up with a plan. You see, I've been quietly taking steps to secure my financial future. I've been building an emergency fund, paying off debts, and investing in my own business. And now, with this letter, I'm going to take the next step." I handed him a set of papers, and his eyes scanned them quickly. I could see the realization dawning on him. He'd underestimated me, and now he was facing the consequences. "You see, I've been preparing for this moment," I said, "and I'm not going to let you take control of my life without a fight. I'm taking back control, and I'm starting with the one thing you think you can control, our home." The look on my husband's face was priceless. He was shocked, confused, and a little scared. He didn't know what to say or do. But I did. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I was determined to see it through. As I walked away, I felt a sense of pride and empowerment. I'd taken the first step towards reclaiming my life, and I was ready for whatever came next. I was no longer the victim, I was the victor. And I was about to take control of my life in ways I never thought possible. I'd never thought of my life as perfect, but looking back, it was. My husband and I had a beautiful home, 2 lovely kids, and a strong marriage. We were the quintessential couple, always smiling for social media, attending family gatherings, and enjoying romantic getaways. But beneath the surface, things weren't quite as idyllic as they seemed. Our home was a masterpiece of modern architecture, with sleek lines, high ceilings, and expansive windows that let in plenty of natural light. It was the perfect place to raise our children, with a big backyard and a swing set that our kids adored. But what made our home truly special was the love and laughter that filled its walls. Or so I thought. As I look back, I realized that our marriage had become a carefully crafted facade. We'd created this image of a perfect family, but the truth was, we were just pretending. My husband and I had grown apart, and our conversations had become shallow and superficial. We'd lost the spark that once brought us together, and our relationship had become a mere routine. But what I didn't know was that my husband had been planning something. He'd been quietly working behind the scenes, making decisions that would change our lives forever. And on that fateful day, he walked into the living room, a letter in his hand, and dropped the bombshell that would shatter our perfect facade. "I've decided to sell the house," he said, his voice matter of fact, as if he was discussing a minor detail rather than a monumental life change. "I've met someone, and I want to start a new life with her." The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to react. My mind went blank. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, and I couldn't catch my breath. I'd never seen this coming, and I couldn't process the information. My husband's announcement was like a punchline to a joke I'd never heard, and I was left standing there, staring at him, wondering if I'd heard correctly. As the words sank in, a wave of emotions washed over me. Betrayal, anger, sadness, they all swirled together in a toxic cocktail that left me reeling. But as I looked at my husband, I saw something that gave me pause. I saw a man who was no longer the person I thought I knew. He was someone who'd been hiding behind a mask, pretending to be something he wasn't. And in that moment, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could let my emotions consume me, or I could take control of the situation. I could rise above the drama and create a new reality, one that was true to who I was. The question was, could I do it? As I stood there, frozen in shock, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was as if I'd reached a turning point, a moment of clarity that would change the course of my life forever. I took a deep breath, and a plan began to form in my mind. I would not be a victim of my husband's actions. I would take back control, and I would create a new future for myself. And that's when I did the unthinkable. I handed him a folder, filled with documents that would change everything. It was a decision that would shift the power dynamics in our relationship, and I couldn't wait to see the look on his face. But that's a story for another time. For now, I'll just say that I'd never felt more empowered in my life. I'd taken a risk, and I'd come out on top. And as I looked at my husband, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one that I would write myself. And then he drops the bombshell, he's selling our home for his girlfriend. I remember the words hanging in the air like a challenge, daring me to react. My husband stood before me, his expression a mix of confidence and nervousness, as if he expected me to simply nod in agreement and go along with the plan. But I wasn't about to play it that way. I felt a jolt of anger, my mind racing with questions and emotions. How could he do this? Didn't he remember all the memories we'd made in this very home? Didn't he care that selling it would be like erasing a part of our history? But I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the immediate reality of the situation. He was serious. He was really going to do it. As I stood there, frozen in shock, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. My husband, however, seemed to think he'd gotten away with something. He took a step closer, his eyes locking onto mine with an expectant glint, as if waiting for me to cave in and accept his decision. But I refused to give in. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart and gather my thoughts. I needed to think, to strategize, to come up with a plan to counter his move. And as I looked at him, I realized that I needed to take control of this situation, to show him that I wasn't just going to sit back and let him dictate the terms. My mind started racing with possibilities, with ways to fight back and protect what was left of our life together. I thought about the legal documents I'd been meaning to update, the joint accounts we'd established, and the shared responsibilities that would now need to be reevaluated. I thought about the memories we'd made in this home, the laughter, the tears, the countless moments that had shaped our relationship. But most of all, I thought about my future. I thought about the life I wanted to build, the life I deserved. And as I looked at my husband, I knew that I couldn't let him dictate the terms of my happiness. I needed to take a stand, to assert my rights, and to reclaim control of my life. The next few minutes felt like an eternity as I processed my thoughts and emotions. I remember pacing back and forth in the room, trying to make sense of the chaos that had erupted in my mind. But as I walked, something inside me clicked. I felt a surge of determination, a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. And that's when I knew what I had to do. I walked back into the room, my eyes locked onto my husband's, and a calm, calculated smile spread across my face. I knew exactly what I was about to hand him, and he had no idea what was coming. "Let's talk about this," I said, my voice steady, my heart pounding in my chest. He nodded, thinking he was in control, but I knew better. I knew that I was about to take back my life, to assert my rights, and to show him that I wasn't going down without a fight. And as I handed him the papers, I knew that everything was about to change. I remember the look on his face, a mix of shock and confusion, as he realized what he'd just gotten himself into. He stumbled backward, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for an escape route. But it was too late. The die had been cast, and there was no turning back. As I stood there, watching him unravel, I felt a sense of pride and empowerment. I had taken control of my life, and I was ready to move on. I was ready to start anew, to build a life that was mine, not one that was dictated by my husband's selfish desires. And as I walked away, leaving him to pick up the pieces of his shattered dreams, I knew that I was finally free. I was finally in control of my life, and nothing would ever be the same again. Gathering her thoughts as I stood frozen, staring at my husband's smug face, I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. The words he'd just spoken still hung in the air, refusing to fade away. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that he was selling our home, the place where we'd built a life together, for his new girlfriend. It was like he'd punched me in the gut, leaving me gasping for air. My mind was racing, a jumble of emotions swirling together in a toxic mix of anger, hurt, and betrayal. I wanted to scream, to yell, to tell him how much he'd hurt me. But something inside me snapped, and I knew I couldn't let my emotions control me. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs, and began to calm down. It wasn't easy. My heart was still pounding, my hands shaking with rage. But I knew I had to think, to plan, to come up with a response that would catch him off guard. I couldn't let him walk all over me, couldn't let him dictate our lives without a fight. So, I forced myself to focus, to think about what I wanted, what I needed. I remembered a phrase my mother used to say, "Hurt people hurt people." I realized that my husband's actions weren't about me, they were about his own pain, his own insecurities. He was trying to fill a void, to replace what was missing in his life. And I was going to use that to my advantage. I started to think about the situation strategically, about how I could use this to my benefit. I could take control, make him realize that I wouldn't go down without a fight. I thought about the things I'd been putting off, the things I'd been too afraid to do. I thought about the life I wanted to live, the life I deserved. As I sat in stunned silence, my mind racing with possibilities, I began to see a glimmer of hope. This was an opportunity, a chance to take back my life, to reclaim what was mine. I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me, a sense of determination that I'd never felt before. I knew I had to be smart, to be calculated in my response. I couldn't just react, couldn't just let my emotions take over. I had to think ahead, to plan for the worst-case scenario. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to take him by surprise, to show him that I was more than just a victim. I wanted to show him that I was strong, that I was capable, that I was in control. And I knew exactly how to do it. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a thrill of excitement mixed with a hint of fear. I knew it was going to be a wild ride, but I was ready. I was ready to take back my life, to show my husband that I wouldn't be pushed around. And I was ready to hand him something he'd never expected. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. I knew what I had to do, and I was ready to do it. The question was, would my husband be ready for what I had planned? I still couldn't believe what he'd just said. The words had hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to react. My husband stood before me, his expression a mix of confidence and nervousness, as if he expected me to simply nod in agreement. But I couldn't. I was frozen, my mind racing with the implications of what he'd just announced. He wanted to sell our home. For his girlfriend. The thought was like a punch to the gut. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. The more I thought about it, the more my anger and betrayal simmered just below the surface. But I knew I had to keep my cool. I couldn't let him see how hurt and angry I was. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. I thought about all the memories we'd made in this house, all the laughter and tears we'd shared. It was hard to believe that it was all being taken away from me, handed over to his new girlfriend like a prize. But I couldn't let myself get caught up in emotions. I had to think clearly, come up with a plan. I started by thinking about my finances, about how I'd take care of myself if he left. I'd always been the one to manage the household budget, to make sure we had enough money set aside for emergencies. I started to feel a sense of determination rising up inside me. I wouldn't let him take everything from me. I'd fight for what was mine, for the life we'd built together. And then I remembered something. A document I'd been working on for weeks, a document that would give me the power to take control of my life. I walked calmly over to my husband, who was still standing in front of me, looking smug and self-satisfied. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder that contained the divorce papers I'd been working on. I think it's time we talked about our future, I said, my voice steady and calm. My husband looked at me in surprise, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of the folder in my hand. "What's that?" he asked, his voice cautious. "It's the divorce papers," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I've been working on them for weeks. I'm sorry it had to come to this, but I think it's time we went our separate ways." My husband's face went white, his eyes wide with shock. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut, like he couldn't believe what I was saying. But I just stood there, my arms crossed, a sense of determination and strength flowing through me. "I'm sorry you didn't expect this," I said, my voice firm. "But I'm taking back control of my life. And I'm not going to let you take everything from me." I handed him the folder, my eyes locked on his. I could see the shock and anger in his face, but I also saw something else. I saw fear. Fear that he'd underestimated me, that he'd thought I'd just roll over and let him take everything. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was a strong, smart, and capable woman, and I was taking back my life. Confronting the truth as I stood frozen, staring at my husband's smug face, I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. The words he'd just spoken still hung in the air, refusing to fade away. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that he was selling our home, our sanctuary, our life together. It was as if he was trying to erase everything we'd built. But something inside of me began to stir. A spark of resistance, a flame of determination. I took a deep breath, and for the first time since this conversation started, I looked my husband straight in the eye. "You know, I've been thinking," I said, my voice steady, "and I realized something. This house isn't just a home, it's a business. It's an investment, an asset, and a liability. And I'm the one who's been managing it, paying the bills, and taking care of the finances all these years." I paused, letting the truth sink in. "So, if you're going to sell me out, if you're going to betray me like this, then maybe you should be prepared to take on the responsibilities that come with it." My husband's expression faltered for a moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He hadn't expected me to be so calm, so collected. He hadn't expected me to be so smart. But I was. I'd been thinking about this for weeks, months, maybe even years. I'd been building a safety net, a financial foundation that would allow me to take care of myself no matter what. So, what did you think you were doing? I asked, my voice steady, selling me out for some young, pretty face? Did you really think I'd just sit back and let you do it? I shook my head, a mixture of anger and sadness swirling inside me. You didn't think about me, about us, about our life together. You just thought about your own desires, your own needs. Well, let me tell you something, honey. I'm not just a pretty face. I'm a partner, a friend, and a wife. And I deserve better than to be sold out like this. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the weight of my words, the power of my truth. My husband looked taken aback, his eyes wide with surprise. He hadn't expected me to fight back, to stand up for myself like this. But I was. I was taking control of my life, of my future. I was reclaiming my power, my voice, and my identity. And that's when I handed him the papers, the documents that would change everything. The divorce papers, the financial settlement, the business decision that would give me control of our shared assets. I smiled, a sense of satisfaction and empowerment washing over me. You see, honey, I've been prepared for this moment for a long time. I've been building a life, a future, a me that's separate from you. And now, it's time for me to take the reins. It's time for me to drive my own life, my own destiny. My husband's face fell, his eyes wide with shock and fear. He'd never expected this. He'd never expected me to be so strong, so resilient, so determined. But I was. I was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who wouldn't be silenced, who wouldn't be sold out. I was a woman who would take control of her life, no matter what it took. And as I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, my voice steady and strong, I knew that I'd finally found my power. I'd finally found my voice. I'd finally found myself. The fallout as I stood frozen, staring at my husband's smug face, I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. The words he'd just spoken still hung in the air, refusing to fade away. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that he was selling our home, the one place that was supposed to be our sanctuary. My mind was racing with thoughts of what this meant for our future, for our marriage, and for me. The silence between us was deafening, and I could feel the weight of his decision settling in like a physical burden. I tried to speak, but the words got stuck in my throat. How could he do this to me? To us? The question echoed in my mind like a mantra, but I knew I had to push past the emotions and take action. My husband, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside me, started to justify his decision. He explained that it was for the best, that we needed to move on and start fresh. But I knew he wasn't thinking about me or us, he was thinking about his new girlfriend, the one he'd been sneaking around with behind my back. I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it aside, choosing instead to focus on strategy. I knew I had to be smart about this, to think several steps ahead of him. I took a deep breath and started to process the situation, trying to make sense of the chaos that had erupted. As I began to think more clearly, I realized that this was an opportunity for me to take control of my life. I had always been the one to compromise, to make sacrifices for the sake of our marriage. But now, I saw that I had been playing into his hands, allowing him to manipulate me and dictate our life together. It was a liberating feeling, knowing that I had the power to change my circumstances. I started to envision a new future for myself, one where I was in charge, where I made the decisions and took care of myself. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt a sense of excitement and possibility. But my husband, still unaware of the storm brewing inside me, continued to try to salvage the situation. He offered me a generous settlement, one that would allow me to move on with my life, but I knew it was just a ploy to keep me quiet, to keep me from fighting back. I smiled to myself, knowing that I had a trump card up my sleeve. I had been quietly gathering my resources, preparing myself for this moment. And now, it was time to make my move. I took a deep breath, and with a sense of calm determination, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. My husband's eyes widened as he realized what I was holding, the divorce papers. He had expected me to be angry, to lash out in a fit of rage, but instead, I was calm, collected, and in control. The look on his face was priceless, a mixture of shock, fear, and regret. He knew he had underestimated me, that I was not the passive victim he had thought me to be. And in that moment, I knew that I had taken back my power, that I was finally free to create the life I wanted. The fallout from my husband's decision had been intense, but it had also been a wake-up call. It had forced me to confront the truth about our marriage and to take control of my life. And as I stood there, looking at my husband with a sense of calm certainty, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. I stood in the living room, the same room where my husband had dropped that bombshell. He was selling our home for his girlfriend. It felt like a lifetime ago. My heart still ached from the shock and betrayal, but today was different. Today, I felt a newfound sense of confidence and control. As I looked around the room, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come. I'd spent months processing my emotions, gathering my strength, and preparing for this moment. I'd taken control of my finances, started saving for a new place, and even began making connections with people in the community. It was time to take the next step. I'd always been the responsible one in our relationship. My husband had been the free spirit, the one who took risks and chased his dreams. But when he made that announcement, something inside me shifted. I realized that I'd been playing a supporting role in our relationship for far too long. It was time to take center stage. I thought back to the day he told me he was selling the house. I remembered the look on his face, the smugness and self-satisfaction. But I also remembered how I felt, trapped and helpless. That's not how I felt today. Today, I felt empowered. Today, I felt like I was taking control of my life. I'd been doing some research on local real estate and had discovered a beautiful property that I fell in love with. It was in a great neighborhood, had plenty of natural light, and was within walking distance to the city center. I'd already put in an offer and was waiting to hear back from the sellers. As I sat on the couch, surrounded by papers and documents, I felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. I was taking a chance on a new beginning. I was taking a chance on myself. But what I was really taking a chance on was something much bigger than just a new home. I was taking a chance on a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I was in control, where I was the one driving the narrative. A chapter where I was the protagonist, not the supporting actor. I looked around the room again, this time with a sense of gratitude. I was grateful for the lessons I'd learned, the strength I'd gained, and the growth I'd experienced. I was grateful for the opportunity to start anew, to create a life that was truly mine. As I stood up, a smile spreading across my face, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. I was ready to take on the world, one step at a time. And I was ready to show my husband that I was not to be underestimated. The question now was, what would he do next? Would he try to take me down, or would he finally see me for who I truly was, a strong, capable, and determined woman? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, I was no longer the same person I was when he dropped that bombshell. I was no longer the same person I was just a few months ago. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. And I was ready to take on whatever came next. As I walked out of the living room, I felt a sense of hope and possibility. I felt like anything was possible, like the world was my oyster. And I knew that no matter what lay ahead, I would face it head-on, with courage, determination, and a heart full of love. As I sit here reflecting on the journey that has brought me to this point, I'm struck by the realization that I've grown more than I ever thought possible. It's funny how sometimes you need to hit rock bottom to discover your inner strength. The day my husband announced he was selling our home for his girlfriend, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions. Betrayal, shock, and confusion swirled together in a toxic cocktail that left me reeling. But as I stood there frozen, staring at the man I thought I knew, something inside of me shifted. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and suddenly I saw the situation for what it was, a perfect opportunity to take control of my own life. I began to think about all the ways I'd been holding back, all the dreams I'd put on hold because I'd been waiting for someone else to make a move. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, I felt a newfound sense of confidence rising up within me. I started taking small steps towards reclaiming my life, reconnecting with old friends, trying new hobbies, and rediscovering passions that had long been dormant. It was exhilarating to feel like I was finally living for myself, rather than trying to fit into someone else's idea of what I should be. One of the most significant moments of growth for me came when I realized that I didn't need my husband's approval or validation to be happy. I started to see that his actions, though painful, had been a blessing in disguise. They'd forced me to confront my own fears and insecurities, and in doing so, I'd discovered a strength and resilience I never knew I had. As I look back on that difficult period, I'm reminded of the saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. But for me, it's more like when life takes away your home, take back your life. It's a mantra I'll carry with me for the rest of my journey, a reminder that no matter what challenges come my way, I have the power to shape my own destiny. Looking back, I can see that my husband's announcement was never about him, but about me. It was a wake-up call, a chance for me to re-examine my priorities and take charge of my own happiness. And as I move forward, I know that I'll continue to grow, to learn, and to evolve. I'll take the lessons I've learned and use them to build a life that's authentic, meaningful, and truly mine. In the end, it's not about what my husband did or didn't do, it's about what I chose to do with the situation. I chose to rise above the pain, to find the strength in the struggle, and to emerge stronger, wiser, and more radiant than ever before. And as I close this chapter of my life, I know that I'm ready for whatever comes next, armed with a newfound sense of purpose, a fierce determination to succeed, and a heart that's full of hope and possibility. It was as if the weight of the world had finally lifted off my shoulders. I stood tall, my eyes locked on the man who had once been my partner, my rock, my everything. The same man who had shattered my world into a million pieces with a single sentence, "I'm selling our home for my girlfriend." The memories of that moment still lingered, like an open wound that refused to heal. But today, I was no longer the same person. I had spent months nursing my broken heart, trying to make sense of the betrayal that had left me questioning my own worth. But as I stood there, I realized that something within me had shifted. I had hit rock bottom, and instead of crumbling, I had risen from the ashes like a phoenix. The fire that had once burned within me had been reduced to embers, but I had fanned the flames back to life. My husband, the man who had once held my hand through life's joys and sorrows, looked at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. He had expected me to break down, to fall apart at the seams, but instead, I stood before him, a stranger in my own skin. I was no longer the damsel in distress, waiting for my knight in shining armor to rescue me. I was a warrior, armed with a newfound sense of purpose and determination. As I looked into his eyes, I saw a glimmer of realization. He had expected me to be weak, to be broken, but I was unbreakable. I had taken control of my life, and nothing could ever take that away from me. The documents I handed him were not just papers, they were a declaration of my independence, a symbol of my freedom. I had taken back what was mine, and he had no say in the matter. For a moment, we locked eyes, the air thick with tension. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what I had just done. He had thought he had control, but I had taken the reins, and he was powerless to stop me. The look on his face was a mixture of shock and awe, a realization that he had underestimated me. In that moment, I felt a sense of catharsis wash over me. The weight of my emotions, the burden of my pain, it all lifted. I was finally free, unshackled from the chains of his betrayal. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs, and smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, but it was mine, and it was enough. As I turned to walk away, I felt a sense of empowerment that I had never felt before. I was no longer the victim, I was the victor. I had taken control of my life, and nothing could ever take that away from me. I walked out of that room, into a new chapter of my life, one that I had written myself. And as I walked, I knew that I would never be the same again. I sat in stunned silence, the words echoing in my mind like a bitter refrain. My husband had announced he was selling our home, not just because he wanted to, but because he was doing it for his new girlfriend. The betrayal stung, a sharp pain that cut through my chest and left me gasping for air. How could he do this to me? To us? To our life together? As the initial shock wore off, I felt a familiar weight settle in, the weight of responsibility. I was the one who had to pick up the pieces, to figure out what came next. It was a daunting task, but I knew I couldn't let his actions define me. I took a deep breath, and a sense of determination began to build inside me. First things first, I needed to get a grip on the situation. I started by reviewing our financial situation, making a list of everything we owned and what I was entitled to. It wasn't easy, there were a lot of memories tied up in this house, and the thought of leaving it behind was hard to swallow. But I pushed through the emotions and focused on the facts. I also began to think about my own future, about what I wanted for myself. I had always put my husband's needs first, making sacrifices for our relationship. But now, I had the chance to put myself first. What did I want to do? Where did I want to live? Who did I want to be? As I explored these questions, I started to feel a sense of excitement and possibility. I realized that I had been living in a state of limbo, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But now, I was taking control. I was the one who was going to make decisions, who was going to shape my own destiny. It wasn't going to be easy, of course. There would be ups and downs, twists and turns. But I was ready for the challenge. I was ready to take on this new chapter of my life, to see where it would lead me. And as I stood up, a sense of hope and possibility filling my heart, I knew that I was finally moving forward. I stood in the silence, my mind racing with the weight of my husband's words. Selling our home, the place where I'd built a life, where memories were made, and love once blossomed. All for his new girlfriend. The sting of betrayal was still fresh, but it was no longer the dominant emotion. Empowerment had taken its place, a slow-burning fire that had been smoldering beneath the surface for weeks. As I began to process the situation, I realized I had a choice to make. I could let the pain consume me, or I could take control of my life. The latter option felt like a daunting task, but I knew it was the only way forward. I'd always been the rock, the one who held things together, and now it was time to let go of that role. It wasn't easy, but I started to gather my thoughts, to assess the situation, and to formulate a plan. I took a deep breath, and with a newfound sense of determination, I began to take charge. I started to make decisions, big and small, that would ultimately lead me to reclaim my life. The action I took next was unexpected, not just for my husband but for myself as well. I handed him a folder, filled with documents that would change the course of our lives forever. It was a moment of truth, a moment of empowerment, and a moment of liberation. I watched as the color drained from his face, and I knew in that instant, the power dynamic had shifted. It's funny how a single action can have such a profound impact. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just taking back control of my home, I was taking back control of my life. I was no longer the victim, I was the architect of my own destiny. The weight of my husband's betrayal was still there, but it was no longer suffocating me. I'd found a way to rise above it, to use it as fuel for my growth. As I reflect on that moment, I'm reminded of the importance of taking control of our lives. We have the power to choose how we react to adversity, how we respond to challenges, and how we navigate uncertainty. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. If you're in a similar situation, I want you to know that you're not alone. You have the power to rise above, to take control, and to create a new narrative for yourself. Don't let anyone, including yourself, dictate your path. You are the author of your own story, and it's time to take the pen. As I look back on that moment, I'm reminded of the strength that lies within me. I'm reminded of the power of resilience, of the importance of taking control, and of the beauty of growth. If you're ready to take control of your life, to rise above the challenges, and to create a new narrative for yourself, then let's do it together. Share your story with me in the comments below, and let's